So what we're going to look at now is how to do the wire links on the soldering license. Now if you look on the soldering license itself and we look at it nice and close up, what you'll see on here is some writing that says both multi-link and single links. That's for multi-core and single core wire. Sometimes we want to put LEDs on and stuff like that, and so it's really useful to be able to solder bits of wire on. So let's look at what it actually means by single and multi-core. I've got here side by side a piece of single core and a piece of multi-core wire. Okay, you can see the multi-core one's made up of lots of strands, and the single core one has just got one central core. The multi-strand stuff's nice because it's really flexible, but then it can be a bit fiddly because of all the individual strands. The single core stuff's more rigid, but it also means it's less likely to snap, and you know, so you might find times where it's more appropriate to use one or the other. So let's look first at doing the single core wire link, and let's look at how it is that we can do that. What I'm actually going to do is I'm going to start by measuring over the top of my PCB how much of the insulation I need. Before I do that, I'm just going to take a piece of blue like I've got just here, get my wire stripper on it and just pop that in there, and I'm just going to do a wire strip just so I've got a piece that I can slide off the end of my wire like this. What I'm then going to do is put this over the top of my single that I've got just here, and I'm going to line that up so one end sits over one of the holes that I've got, and that the other end is sort of giving me an indication of where the other one needs to go, which is basically just here. So I've made a mark of that, just holding it carefully in my hands, and all I'm then going to do is snip that bit off. Before we do anything else, let's actually confirm that that's the right length. So I'm actually going to take that piece and just stand it over the top of where it says single link, and actually at the moment it's just a little bit too long, so I'm just going to take another millimetre off there. It's well worth taking the time to get this right, because it will look much nicer, more professional once it's finished if you do this well. Yeah, I think I'm about happy with that. All I'm then needing to do is to take my original piece of single that I stripped before. This other end actually can come off here now as well. As you can see, it's plenty fiddly, so don't be scared to use a bit of mechanical advantage to help you with that. And I'm then going to slide my trimmed piece back over the end of my wire. Okay, so that's going on there. On she goes. Sometimes it goes straight on, other times you're making video tutorials. That's what it's like. Okay, here it is. It's going. There you go. So that's sat in the middle there. I don't need a huge amount on either end, because I'm going to obviously trim it once it's finished. So I'm just going to leave it looking kind of something a bit like that. Okay, so that's my piece of wire now ready to go into the board. Then, just to be nice and neat, I'm just going to grip this gently in my long nose pliers. Just bend that over 90 degrees. Get onto the other end, grip it gently, and again bend it over 90 degrees. So I end up with something that looks kind of like this. I can then take that and place that through the appropriate holes on my PCB, like that. That dropped perfectly into place, perfectly flat piece of wire, fantastic work by me. And I'm then, just like any other component, going to spread the legs out to about 45 degrees, and let's get that soldered into place. So again, let's make sure we remember our correct soldering technique that we're now very well versed in. So we're going to be putting our goggles on, of course, then putting our soldering line up nice and vertical still. Soldering iron comes into place, count to 3, feed in a small amount of solder, take it away. Other side, count to 3, feed in some solder, take it away. Lovely job. Once that's finished, I can then get in here with a side cutter, just like I've done before, and trim, and that is the first one of my 2 wire links. Let's look now at the multi-core wire. Let's do the same sort of idea again. So I need to grab my piece of multi-core that I've got. There's my third hand just there. And to make this a little bit easier on myself, what I'm also going to do before I get any further is I'm actually going to twizzle this wire up in my fingers, because otherwise the multi-core likes to escape. And what I'm also going to do is cheat just a tiny little bit as well, just by putting the tiniest, and I really do mean tiniest, little bit of solder just on here as well to make this easier to work with. So I'm going to put the soldering line underneath here and just put a little bit of solder on like that, and that will now stop that from all coming undone. I'm also going to do this a slightly different way this time, just so you can see that there's variety out there, and I'm going to start by bending this over 90 degrees. And I'm going to pop this in the first one of my multi-link holes, which I think is this one just here. If you put too much solder on, you'll encounter the problem I'm encountering right now, which is it won't want to go through the hole. I'm sure this one will with a bit of persuasion. I've got a good feeling. There it is. That's in. Okay, so that's my first one in. I'm then going to come along here, and I can see where my second hole is. This time what I'm actually going to do, because it's multi-core, it's not really going to want to slide on and off neatly for me. So instead, I'm just going to use my side cutter. I'm just going to make just a tiny, I'm not actually going to cut, okay, I'm just literally using this to make a mark. I'm just going to pinch that very, very gently with the side cutter. And that's where I know my second piece needs to be stripped back to, okay, and I'll be able to use that in a minute. Let's pop this out for a second. And what I'm now going to do is I'm going to get my wire stripper, okay, and I'm going to take my wire stripper and I'm going to bring that so it lines up with that mark I just made, where these jaws are just here. You see these jaws, the bits that pinch and pull back? I'm lining those up with where I just made that mark, putting it in there, and okay, the wire stripper tried to destroy the wire for me, but I've still got plenty of the cores, so it'll still work. What I can now do is fold it over 90 degrees, like so. And let's get that soldered in. So first end goes in, that's no problem. Second end, a little bit fiddly because you've got more cores, so you want to make sure they all go through the hole. This one's trying to be a bit uncooperative. What I'm also going to do over here is twizzle that up before I bend that back down again. And I'm actually going to do the most awkward end first, I think. Come on. Getting tempted to do my little solder trick on this again, you know, actually. Again, what you can appreciate as well, and the reason we do these things sort of live, so to speak, is so that you can see it's not always straightforward. It doesn't always go in first time, so I'm just going to give that a squidge of solder. Okay, here we go. Third time's the charm. It's also difficult as well doing this at arm's length. You don't have to do yours at arm's length. There we go, that's gone in. Let's push that down nice and flat. Leg out 45 degrees. Leg out 45 degrees. Connect it up. And let's again practice that lovely, perfect soldering technique that we've come to expect. Soldering iron in, count to 3, feeding in a bit of solder. Soldering iron in, count to 3, bit of solder. And I don't mind saying so myself, that's gone on pretty good actually. So now that side cutter again, and we can inspect our work. So what you can now see, I've got my 2 wire links, 1 single core and 1 multi-core that have gone in place. One last thing I just want to talk about before we end this tutorial, and it's this. You're going to need also to solder in, just temporarily actually, this chip carrier just here. This is an 8-pin chip carrier. We use these all the time when we're putting in things like 555 timers and programmable chips, you know, Genie chips as well. Just going to pop that in there. I'm going to solder that in because one of the other things you need to be able to do is to show you can desolder. So we're actually going to solder this in so that we can take it out later. Now with these, they don't always want to sit very, very neatly, and they also don't clamp particularly well in here. So what I tend to do when I'm doing mine is I tend to place it and then put it down flat on the table. Okay, put it down flat on the table, make sure all 8 little pins are sticking out, and then I tend to start to solder it in. What I also do is I only actually solder in one of them. I tend to put in a top corner one, like I'm just doing now. And then once I've done just a top corner one, I then pick it up again and just make sure it's definitely sitting nice and flat on the board before I solder in the others, because once you put in a few of these it becomes very, very difficult to make changes later. So once I've done that one, I can now quite confidently put in all my other ones. This is also a good exercise in precision because the actual individual pins are all very, very close together, so you're going to have to make sure as you do yours that you don't end up with one touching another. Otherwise, if you're doing it for a live project, you'd need to continue to add extra solder all the time, like so. So I'm going to finish this now and have this put on, and when you join me in the next tutorial, what we'll look at is how to do a track repair, which is basically the one before last stage in the soldering license. So I'll see you then.